Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Stradley Talking Investment Management podcast. I'm Dave Grimm. I'm a partner in the investment management group here at Stradley, and I'm thrilled to be joined by two very special guests for the fifth episode of our podcast. I'd like to introduce my special guests to the audience. First is Cynthia Plouché. If you work in the asset management industry, you know that Cynthia doesn't really need an introduction, but I'm going to give it a whirl anyway. Cynthia is the chair of the IDC Governing Council, as well as a member of the ICI Board of Governors. She's also an independent director for the Northern Trust Funds and the Northern Trust Institutional Funds, as well as for the Mass Mutual Funds, and has more than 25 years of experience as a fixed income portfolio manager and financial executive. She also has a very long list of involvement with terrific nonprofit initiatives, including the Black and Crimson Passport for Boards, which increases board placement for Black and Latino Harvard alumni, the Alzenia Project, whose goal is to leverage the impact of other nonprofits committed to helping young women of color to achieve personal and professional growth, and The Village, a social venture designed to expand access to out-of-school education for K-12 children. Welcome, Cynthia. We're so thrilled to have you here today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
I'd also like to introduce Sara Crovitz. She, too, really needs no introduction for a podcast like this because, like Cynthia, she's been in our industry for more than 25 years. She's currently a partner in our investment management group here at Stradley and has a very broad practice covering fund advisor and board issues. Prior to Stradley, Sara served with distinction for many, many years at the SEC, including as the Deputy Chief Counsel and Associate Director, leading the provision of legal guidance to the industry as well as the international efforts in the investment management space. Sara's sophisticated understanding of SEC regulation and compliance for funds and advisors is sought after in our industry, and her expansive practice covers the most pressing issues of the day for us, such that she's a frequent speaker and thought leader at conferences and industry events. And so welcome to Sara. And it's such a thrill for me to have the opportunity to have this discussion with the two of you today. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, there's so much going on at the SEC right now. It's sort of hard for all of us to, including fund directors, to kind of keep up and figure out like what is most important to know. The goal of our time together is to give you exactly that. What is the most important to know in an easy to understand way? We picked a number of issues that are top of mind for many directors that we talked to today. The issues are the following: cybersecurity, ESG, the SEC's outsourcing proposal, fund fees and expense disclosure, artificial intelligence, diversity in the boardroom, and succession planning. For each of these issues, Sara and I are going to summarize the issue, including what's going on at the SEC, and then ask Cynthia to share her perspective as a director and a leader in the industry on the issues. So with that, that's our plan for today, and let's get rolling with our first issue. So we're going to start with cybersecurity. And the way I think about cyber, when you ask, either what you ask regulators or you ask many in the industry about the risks that keep you up at night, cybersecurity is often on that list. And that is true for many at the SEC, which has taken a number of actions relating to cybersecurity, including a rule proposal for funds and advisors. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the specific requirements in the rule. I think in summary, it requires policies and procedures, SEC reporting, public disclosure, and record keeping. That's broadly what the rule's about. When it comes to fund boards, their obligations under the proposed rule will be to approve those policies and procedures and also to review the annual report. In some ways, the cyber rule is similar to some of the other rules that boards have implemented recently in the risk management space, derivatives and liquidity, right? It's the similar kind of framework where the procedures come to you for your approval, and then you review an annual assessment of the program. There are also some questions around whether this rule is necessary, given all the time and energy that everyone in our industry spends on trying to protect against cyber incidents. The SEC has been very aggressive, actually, from an enforcement perspective in the cyber arena. And again, the question is, if they've been aggressive in the enforcement arena, why do they necessarily need this rule? Nonetheless, they proposed it, and it's out there for public comment. And so here we are, on the precipice of them probably adopting it in the coming months. And so with that wind up, Cynthia, I guess I would turn it to you and say, given the role for boards under this proposal, based on your experience, are boards concerned with having cybersecurity expertise on their board? Do they think that it's necessary to have an expert as a director? Let us know what you think of the rule, and in particular that perspective on it.
Well, as you said, we've seen this kind of framework before, right? In terms of how we, have the responsibility of doing, the policies and procedures review and the annual. And so that's not, something that would keep a board member up at night, because we're just used to that drill. I think if we look at it, in addition to the policies and procedures, there's the commitment of sufficient resources to that, right? And so I think that is a board's responsibility. However you get to that with your discussions with the advisor, I think that's important. Having a person on the board with the cybersecurity background, it's conceptually a nice idea, I think. But I think cybersecurity is so rapidly changing, and how it gets implemented, what's new, what's current, what are the, and I think that a retired trustee would bring a nice lens to look all of that. But basically, my approach or my thinking is that this is a real-time problem. And so you're best served by people who are experts in the industry who are currently involved. And I think most boards now have access to that professional, outreach, so that it's part of your annual reviews. It's part of a quarterly report, or, something with, determined frequency. And so I think that's the most important thing. And then ultimately, are you getting the responses that make sense to you, that you can understand? I mean, from the management team, because again, and you'll hear me as we talk, I'm very much one of the, what do they say, noses in, fingers out kind of style. I don't think that it's our job to be operational managers per se. So, I think that's really my take on it, is that, boards have access to professional consult, if you will, both internally and externally, and they should, as a practice, it makes sense to, to take advantage of that.
I agree with you 100%. And in fact, when I get this question from trustees, I try to answer it as well as you just did. And so the next time I get it, I might call you to have you help me answer it, because that's exactly how I want to answer it. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah. One other question about cyber. I mentioned in the framework of the proposed rule, there's a reporting to the SEC for significant cyber events, and that reporting is required to be done within 48 hours of the incident happening. And I guess the question for boards and for you, Cynthia, is, are boards concerned that kind of a quick turnaround in some ways can be viewed as usurping your board's role in sort of overseeing a cybersecurity incident?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that boards generally, you receive information, and we are an industry that has a lot of data, and so that's a plus, right? But I think, until you have had a chance, even for management, to assess what's going on and then share that with the board, even if it's a small portion of the board, you can't actually do your job as for oversight, right? You cannot oversee the compliance function. And so I do think that while I respect the commission wanting to have its finger on the pulse, as you must allow, I think, the system to work first, right? And when you put the right rules and procedures in place, then you're setting up for success for all, because ultimately it is about the shareholder. And so you need to just have a level of patience, if you will, in terms of, getting to the conclusion or understanding what's going on.
All right, so that's a wrap on cyber. Sara, I'm going to kick it to you to take our next topic.
Great. So we were to talk next about the ESG and the ESG rule proposal that came out last summer, which should not be confused, of course, with the names rule proposal, which also came out last summer, but has now been adopted. And interestingly, and we won't get into that today, but interestingly, of course, the names rule was adopted and the ESG proposal has not been acted upon yet. So the ESG proposal, similar to what we were discussing with cyber, right? The role for the board, again, is sort of an oversight role, a policy and procedure role. The rule proposal would require enhanced disclosure for funds and advisors around ESG strategies. And I think, namely, to put it at a really high level, I think the board role there is sort of overseeing the advisor to make sure the advisor is saying what they're doing and doing what they're saying, which I think is sort of where most people are, the way most people think about ESG. And so I guess I wanted to ask Cynthia, in your role as a trustee, and sort of thinking about ESG and the policies and procedures you've seen around, fund actions and disclosure around ESG and funds that you might be overseeing, what do you think boards should be thinking about when they're thinking about any kind of policy and procedure oversight or disclosure oversight of ESG?
Yeah, this is, I would say this is a kind of a delicate topic, right? Because of what's gone on over the past several months. And as directors, you're kind of looking for that balance between, overseeing management of conflicts of interest and putting the shareholders' interests first. And so I think that clearly understanding what's in your portfolios and now with all the language around what type of ESG exposure, is an important thing to consideration. So I'll go to the back end of, I think that ultimately more and more boards will be crafting dashboards that are specific to this ESG question, so that as a board member, you can have the ability to, see all the different layers, to see, where your exposures are, because we're in the risk management business, basically, as fund directors. And so I think that's where we'll eventually land. But right now, I feel like the landscape is still shifting so much. And then what is it's not that different from DE&I, where is the board's responsibility? And it's different for a corporate board than where the strategy comes to play more than it does in the fund board community. So, what is our role? And I think we go back to our meat and potatoes kind of thing, right? It's where are the potential conflicts? Do you understand, what you're telling your shareholders and what management is telling you? And then ultimately it's, the disclosures, right? And so perhaps more and more attention now goes to those disclosures, because this is how we message out and this is how we are held accountable for, doing what we say, and we, meaning governance as well as management, right? And so that's kind of my short answer.
Great. So I guess the second question, and you touched on this already, so maybe there's not more to say about it, but are there good examples you've seen of reports or materials that boards can receive from the advisor to help with the oversight role?
Yeah, I think, people who've been in the ESG space for a while now have a head start, right? Because they've already been forthcoming. They've been showing you things, and we've held webinars and conference segments on the topic. And so now the rest of us are coming up to speed, because you're right, even with the names rule, does that impact what you're calling your funds? And will that cause disruption for a minute in terms of, again, the compliance, the disclosure? So I think I said, changing landscape, you kind of put your seatbelt on a little bit here, and then and it's so, I think it's really complex by complex. But what we're all looking for and what we're being asked to do is to bring a uniformity to that process, which is a challenge, and this is where you sometimes give us more guidance. Tell us, specifically what it is that you're looking for, and we will deliver.
Right. I think it's particularly challenging because it seems pretty apparent that when the 33 Act disclosure rule gets put into place, whenever that happens, that there's going to be litigation on that rule. And so
yes.
my fear has always been that the SEC continues with the fund and advisor ESG disclosure rule, so that funds and advisors are now having to make disclosures about underlying data, which itself may not actually be subject to SEC rule, right, for consistency. Which would be pretty unfair, but unfortunately I could see that. I guess that's what keeps me awake at night. I'm not a director, but that's what keeps me awake at night.
Right. No, I think you're very right in the sense that, we do have a lot of data, and where do we kind of draw the line so that a complex, can have some proprietary, information that's protected, because they're in this as a business, and you need to, there's secret sauces, right? And here's the balance is, do we as a board in a confidential way understand what the secret sauce is? Are we being told enough so that we can understand what's going on, so that there are no blind sides, no surprises, and just, this is all about a level of trust and confidence, right, in the communication between the board and the complex management team.
Okay, great. Thanks to both of you. Let's kick it to our next topic, which is the advisor outsourcing proposal that the SEC rolled out. And very briefly, what that does is it basically makes outsourcing unlawful for an advisor. Like you can't retain a service provider to perform outsourced services unless you do the things required by the rule, which is basically around due diligence and monitoring. When you go through the public comments on this rule, there's actually not a big focus on boards. And that's, I think, in part because boards aren't a big focus in the proposal. I think a theme of the comments is, hey, we've got this compliance rule already on the books. And under that compliance rule, the board plays a very prominent role, first of all. And second of all, it already requires oversight of key service providers. So I think there's some question around whether this rule is necessary in the fund space. And then there's also a bunch of other questions and confusion around the defined term in the rule is this covered function. I mean, what even is that, right? What is covered, what is not covered, basically. Yeah. So that's a bit about sort of what's in the rule and what the comments have been. But let's Cynthia, let's bring you into this, right? Ultimately, what this rule is about is service provider oversight, which you as a director, you live and breathe, all the time. So what do you find most helpful in performing that role as a director?
Some of the, some of it comes through the 15C process right away, right? And so, the depth of your 15C process, which I think these days covers more than one quarterly meeting for most boards, some aspect of it feels like it's year round. And I think that I have not heard of when it didn't work in the way that we're, doing it now. I think service providers do provide an essential role. And I, as a board member, I do appreciate the highest tier of service providers coming in and giving you insight into their operations. You can look, if there's, a lot of M&A activity in the space, there are things that matter to you. And so if you took what to me are the top items for this board oversight, I don't think the board should be dipping down to a lower level, but hearing from the people who, if you use someone for performance metrics, yes, that makes sense. But even that, if you get your hands on a very detailed report and you have a detailed conversation with management, because I think ultimately I'm going to go back to this is management's responsibility for educating the board, for making sure the board understands what they're doing. Then, that's kind of my answer. One place two things come to mind. How does this impact small funds? And, it's different if you're a large asset under management, but it's, a different set of challenges for small fund boards. So that's the first thing that comes to mind for me. And I do find it interesting to every once in a while lift the portfolio people off the page and have some of them present to you in person, because you do get a feel for never forgetting that there are humans on the other side of this. And some of your most important, depends on the structure of the complex, but that human talent, which are doing the investments on your behalf, and interesting. And so I would say, as an aside note that I have found in the past to be interesting is actually visiting the investment management team on their turf, rather than just having them come into you, because it does get to be, oh yes, open page 5, that sort of thing. But kicking the tires periodically, but again, management's role to do so. And we have this in-depth process that goes with the compliance role, right? And so, I find being asked to go further into the vendor relationships, is just unnecessary, unless there's a problem. And so, and then that is the board's responsibility and the management's.
Love it. That's great. Thank you. Thank you for that. Sara, you want to take the next one?
Sure. So one interesting item that appeared on the SEC's regulatory flexibility agenda for a possible spring proposal is this item around fund fee and expense disclosure. And the wording in the Reg Flex agenda doesn't give us a lot of detail. It just says the division is considering recommending the commission propose changes to regulatory requirements relating to registered investment companies' fees and fee disclosure. And so it's not entirely clear what that is. But there have been issues, and Dave and I, my God, were involved in this back in like 2002. There have been periodic efforts to require more personalized fee disclosure by funds. And back when we looked at this in the early 2000s, there was sort of a congressional intent or interest in requiring funds to show a quantitative measure of overall transaction costs. And at that time, the SEC pushed back really against this congressional interest, basically saying, proposals to quantify overall transaction costs are attractive in theory, but really not feasible in practice. And estimates of overall transaction costs are not really ones that you can do uniformly or reliably. And so I guess I have a couple of questions for you on this. First, I guess just going to your own fixed income experience. I think the point the SEC was trying to make here is, while you may be able to pretty clearly and easily quantify transaction costs if you're talking about commissions, what do you do with something like a fixed income security, right? How do you actually quantify what the cost would be, to an investor on that? I think that's something that has always been a real complication with regard to these proposals.
Yeah, and first off, I find it interesting that the commission was on the other side of this argument from back in 2000, right? They were, no, we can't do this because of the things that you're saying, and so the world goes around, but you're absolutely right that, and it makes sense from reading the notes, and thank you for that, on the inability to pinpoint true cost, particularly in fixed income, is just, it's daunting. And, when we talk about spreads, when we talk about market impact and opportunity costs, it just doesn't make sense unless, I don't see how that happens, because a lot of this is a negotiated market of sorts. And unless everything was trading by a spreadsheet or a bid list, there you have some glimpse into solving the problem, I guess. But I don't, am I worried about it? Not so much yet, because there's so much else on our plates that spring 2024 seems a little bit away, and we got these other battles to look at. But that's my overall reaction, is that, it feels like it would be cumbersome. It feels like it would add cost to shareholders. And it feels like building that out is going to further narrow who participates in the market, from the providers, as well as, how much information does the shareholder need and want. And I'm not saying don't give them. It's just, there's a balance, is my point. I don't know what else to say about this one. As more information comes out, then we have more to digest, right? And I've said it before, but ours, especially the registered fund world, we have registered advisors. We have a lot of data, and that makes us ripe for, the pickings, if you will. Provide us this, provide us that. And so, it's not a bottomless pit of resources that are available to do this. And then taking it back up to the board level, where does the board fit in this discussion?
Yeah, no, thanks. That's great. Yeah, well, this one will be maybe something we can talk about in a podcast next year, or maybe we'll get lucky and we won't have to.
And we won't have to, right. Because it has had an evolution over time since that 2000, and so it will be interesting to see. We know fee disclosure is an important item, but it's important to the commission, right? And so where it goes, I think we kind of have to wait and see.
Right, and we've already had, we've had shareholder report updates. We've had, numerous sort of registration statement updates over the years. So it's, do we really need this one?
And what just went through that has until next year to be implemented? It has to do with more tailored
The tailored shareholder reporting.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So a lot.
In summary, a lot. Well said, Cynthia. Let's
So
go
articulate.
on to, yeah. Let's just add to the a lot pile with our next topic, which is AI, predictive data, right? So here's another area where this one actually the SEC has rolled out a rule proposal, and just broadly speaking, it's a little bit legal sounding, right? Like basically, advisors have to eliminate or neutralize conflicts anytime they use covered technologies in investor interactions. So, like, I know there's a whole bunch of defined terms there that I'm not going to get into. The way I like to explain it to people is, if you have a investing app on your phone, what the SEC is worried about, right, is every time you go in, you trade something and you get the balloons celebrating, great job investing, that they're worried that promotes, behavior that's maybe not in the best interest of the investors, right? Is that going to encourage you to overtrade or invest in things that you really shouldn't be investing in? And so there's that sort of
it's not quite
concern.
It's not quite moral hazard, but it's, I don't know. But go ahead.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so, okay, if that's the policy concern, and then there's this rule that has, all kinds of concerns with it. Like, we're actually the public comments aren't due quite yet. They're due in October of 2023. So folks are still working on the specifics of their comments, but I think you've already heard sort of a preview of some very, very critical concerns by various folks, right? I mean, this is a war on technology, right? It's an attack on investor education, right? Like, a lot of these tools that are sort of captured by this rule are intended to help the very investors that the SEC seems to be, concerned about their activity. So there's all kinds of really major concerns. When you get to the legal part of it, it's sort of how the rule defines dealing with conflicts is a new way, sort of would overturn long-standing approaches to how to deal with conflicts. There's questions about the SEC's authority to do this rule at all. So there's going to be a lot in the comment file for sure. So looking forward to reading all of those comments. But with that kind of wind up, Cynthia, there's lots of discussion of AI these days, right? It's in the headlines all the time. Obviously, the advisors and the compliance folks at the managers and the lawyers are wound up about this proposal. But talk about how boards, what do boards think about AI?
Yeah. So it's early in the game for us, I would say, right? It's but most of the discussions that I've been privy to or heard, it's been more about the benefits of AI, right? And the good that can be done from various aspects of the fund business. And so, and I personally am excited about what's happening in this technological aspect of what, the environment that we find ourselves in. I think the piece about investor education, it's absolutely true, that you can, one of my things is about financial literacy, right? And so how can you get education, literacy out to younger generations in particular, and make that be something that makes sense to them? And if maybe you're worried for the promoting behavior that feels like gambling, but there will be a certain percent of the population that that will take that avenue. But I don't believe that you set policy and regulations to, to minimize the bad. Well, you minimize the bad, but you should be facilitating an overall lift and improvement for your shareholder base, your shareholder community. And so I would be one who just keeps marching on what about the investor education here? And what about, making, in a world that's just going gangbusters to, a more technologically driven place, I think you have to kind of get with the program. And I appreciate that we don't want, that this possibility where the interest of the advisor and the fund might not always be aligned on this. But until we kind of flesh out and know more about what's being done, we can't know that. And I'm not a person who just goes to the negative side of things, right? And that's not how I lead. And I believe that you can, from a investment manager standpoint, if you build a new widget and it helps you bring more returns to your investors, you should be within boundaries able to do that, to pursue that. And so, that's kind of my take on it, is that we should support the development of the technology, and the companies who do that. And you do put the bumper, the guardrails up, but I find it, we've been around, mutual funds have been around a long time. We need to kind of rise up to the level of what shareholders are expecting these days, because I would say that we don't want to be the dinosaur, and that's a concern I have, that we need to provide for those 100 million people who use mutual funds or whatever, an opportunity to keep it simple, keep it regulated, and keep opportunities of positive investment returns in place.
Cynthia, I have a really important question for you.
Yes.
When is your TikTok video on financial literacy coming out?
I'll script it and let someone else do get the glory.
So Cynthia, thanks, and I think that response just demonstrates why you're such a cherished and valued independent trustee in so many places. So we also wanted to touch on a couple of non-regulatory issues that I think, that I know are important to you. So what can you tell us about the IDC's initiatives around board diversity? Because I know that's something that you've been really involved in.
Yeah, and I'm very proud that it's over the past year, IDC really has taken a variety of initiatives, and they've been in a variety, various forms, right? And so we have a speaker series, and recently we had Ken Burns and Roger Ferguson last year or so. And even within those discussions, interviews, we weave in diversity and inclusion. And so my point is that at every aspect of IDC, we keep that, at the forefront. And that's, so there's the speaker series, which is more indirect. And then we have more directly a partnership with Diligent, which has basically created a portal type situation for interested candidates to put their information in and have board opportunities be accessible to them through that work. We've continued to build a relationship with the Twigo Foundation, which is supportive of, in the financial services world, many wonderful candidates have come out of that organization. And then we're doing something called a pilot program called Connections, where we provide the opportunity for someone who wants to be a fund board director, to talk to someone, they call them seasoned, trustees. And so those one-on-ones help you, even if you're kind of early in the process of thinking about fund boards and thinking about what they mean and what we do. And so those are sort of the indirect things. And then more directly, we have each year, as part of our conference, we'll have panels that address the topic as well. And so I would say, we're doing a lot, and we have more to come for the year ahead. And, again, basically, we're just trying to keep the issue front and center without beating anyone over the head about it, but with realizing the importance, both gender diversity, all kinds of diversity, and keeping an eye on how the meter is moving.
That's great. Really, it's just wonderful to hear the initiatives that the IDC is doing in this area. And so glad that you're there and supporting and pushing them through. So I guess the last topic we want to just touch base with you on, because it's such a perennial issue for all boards, is succession planning. How do you think about board succession planning? Are there any tips you would share with your colleagues who are listening to this podcast when they start to think about needing to replace someone on their board?
Yeah, so my first thought about this is that you keep it as transparent as possible. And that's a balancing act too, right? Because you want everyone to be able to give feedback or weigh in. And so I think a lot rolls into the chair for this. I think that transparency, or the council also plays a good role here. And I say that because to the extent that council does our assessments and helps us, with the annual, is making it clear in that process that you can raise your hand to be considered, right? And so it's not raising it in the middle of the boardroom, but it is saying in the confidence of your assessment, yeah, this is something I think I would like to do. And I think that ties in also with being very straightforward and direct in terms of how you committee chairs and the whole thing, succession. I believe I'm a supporter of succession in terms of board term limits or role limits, I should say, so that you give an opportunity for leadership to be passed around in the boardroom. And and again, I think that's the most important thing, I think, is the balance that has to happen. And when you're and you can't let it be, oh, we're now a year out. I think good succession planning starts, at least a couple of years. But one, it takes a while to find candidates, and two, and we're not. If I'm talking about succession of the chair, I always hope that you can find that person from within the group, the existing board, and so. That's why I say give people the chance to raise their hand. That's the part that I would say sticks with me the most. Have I missed anything on that, or was something you would ask me about succession planning that I'm not focusing on?
I guess the only other thing you could address, if you have any tips on it, would be sort of bringing in new candidates. That process, what do you think works really well for having the board see good candidates? Obviously, the IDC Diligent resources one people could be using, but those kinds of resources. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that the IDC portal is just getting started, and we have had what we tried. And I've seen others get away from, is just having it be that close network of your closest friends, I'll say it that way, right? And so how do you as a board expand your cast your net more widely? And a lot of times there are third parties who will help you do that. I think counsel comes in handy, because over time, just gathering resumes, and we know this is a highly networked kind of community, right? And so IDC members, we are there to, if you call in or email in, someone will talk to you, to help you ready yourself. But I think this is also getting to onboarding. And once you have done the work of, whittling down a list of 30 to a list of 5 to you get the person who you think fits you, then just making, again, I call on it. My experience has been that counsel has helped to do some orientation and to make, people aware that you won't get this all in your first or 2 meetings, and so I think the runway that people have matters, because it just takes a while. And so that's, that patience again is important. Some people can hit the ground running. More and more boards, are putting in age, limits. And so that matters in terms of, and I think the days of people having 25-year terms on boards is probably, in the rearview mirror. I think ultimately board work and the fun board work is about collaboration and who you will be in the trenches with. And I think it matters even more so now, and I'll close with this, is that I think, as the landscape keeps changing, as technology, as regulatory demands grow, the makeup of your board can change too. We don't all need to be portfolio managers. We don't all need to be accountants, but those people who are just analytically focused, problem solvers, and with personalities that can, worked with other people. And it's not always easy with type A's, They're used to, this is my show.
Oh, Cynthia, there are no type A's on any of your boards, are there?
No.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks.
Yeah, that's really, really terrific. So I guess I just close by saying it was just an amazing discussion. I mean, there's so many more things we could talk about, but I let's wrap it for now. And I just wanted to say thanks so much to both.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. I learned a lot on the way, which I always think if you've gotten something out of it, then that's great. So thank you very much for having me.
It's funny. Your message is exactly mine. I was like, just thinking how much I learned as we were talking today. So thank you. Thank you for teaching me. It's been great to have you. And I'm sure our audience also learned a lot from listening to us. So thanks again. And thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks so much for tuning in to episode 5 of Stradley Ronon's Talking Investment Management podcast. For more than 95 years, Stradley Ronon's investment management practice has helped shape the investment management industry by assisting with the creation of innovative investment products and services. From obtaining industry-first, exemptive and no-action relief to assisting in the development of novel products, we have helped our clients become or remain industry leaders. As the investment management industry and our clients have evolved, so have we, adding attorneys with experience in emerging areas such as next-generation exchange-traded products, commodity futures trading commission regulation, and swaps and other derivatives trading. Meet our team at stradley.com.